Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. This is related to the course on fields of social work practice. I'm going to talk about the subsection on competencies needed for social work practice in family studies. I am Leena Kashyap. I have retired now. I was former Deputy Director and Emeritus Professor at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. In this module, I will give a brief overview of the wide scope of social work practice in family studies, and I will then give a detailed description of the competencies needed for social work practice in family studies. So these are the two major objectives of this particular subsection. Now, as far as scope of practice in family studies is concerned, it can be practiced in primary and secondary settings. Primary settings are like family counseling centers, and secondary settings are such as education, healthcare, as well as in community settings. One can develop expertise in specific stages of life such as infancy, childhood, adolescence, adulthood, or later adulthood, or even the elderly. Or the focus of practice can be on certain topics or issues such as sexuality, health and wellness, parenting, adoption, relationships, family law, family policy, family resource management, poverty, immigration, just to name a few. You can also practice as family life educators, counselors, or therapists, or in family case management. Now, these are all the practice areas and roles that have been suggested by the National Council on Family Relations in 2004. As you may have realized in the last two sections, the emerging demands from this field of social work and the diversity and practice calls for certain specific knowledge, value base and skills which have to be added to your repertoire of generic social work knowledge, value base and skills. You need to add these so as to achieve competence in social work in family studies. Now, I'm going to go through each competency one by one, explain it briefly. The first one is that you need to not only identify yourself as a trained social worker, you need to identify yourself as a family studies social worker as well. How will you do that? By operationalizing your strong belief in the notion of democracy, self-determination, and the centrality of the family unit in people's lives. By actively collaborating with the family unit and by assisting the family unit in identifying and using its assets and strengths to cope with its problems or to meet its needs. Also, you need to actively develop interdisciplinary collaborations with other social science educators, researchers and practitioners for promoting family well-being. The second competency that you need to achieve is that you need to be very ethical in your practice. Now, as far as social workers are concerned, our professional decisions are based on the code of ethics drawn up by the National Association of Social Workers, as well as the ethical principles and guidelines for family scientists drawn up by the National Council for Family Relations. I would urge you to look at both these guidelines which are available on the net. You need to demonstrate respect for each family unit's individuality and dignity, and a right of acceptance, self-determination and empowerment. Sometimes, and this is important to say because sometimes we talk about all families in a very generic way, as if they have everything in common and there's nothing unique about them. Actually, every family is unique and individual in its own way. and you need to be able to respect that. You also will need to demonstrate a belief that all families, regardless of caste, class, religion, or family structure, have the right to be included in society, have a right to access to required services, and have outcomes equal to other family units. So to be treated as normal as any other family unit. You need to demonstrate that you honor the racial, ethical, and cultural and socio-economic diversity of families. You also need to show commitment to work for the elimination of oppression of vulnerable families as a unit and oppression of the family unit of any of its members. Because families are oppressed by certain environmental factors, but family members within a family are also oppressed by family norms and values. The third component and the third competency that you need to achieve is that you need to develop self-awareness for effective practice. Now, as a social worker, of course, you need to be self-aware. But when you, as a family social worker, you need to be aware about your assumptions about families, and that families have certain different structures, like you may have single parent families, or they may have certain lifestyles, such as families of homosexuals parents, or are from low socioeconomic status, or have certain belief systems, such as the belief in, say for example, indigenous healers, or are less healthy, functional, or desirable than others. So we need to be aware of our own assumptions about families with different structures. We need to demonstrate respect for the structural and cultural uniqueness of each individual family. I'm saying it here again because I need to emphasize this. We need to recognize and accept racial and ethnic differences as well as urban, rural, tribal differences among families, and not put them on the same level. And you need to provide interventions keeping all the above in mind. So your self-awareness has to have all these aspects within you as well. When we say self-awareness, it also means that you need to develop into a culturally competent family-centered professional by vigilantly conducting self-assessments of your own potential biases and of your own level of self-awareness and sensitivity to how culture influences the definition and social construction of family and its self-seeking and coping patterns. See, we are all products of our own socialization, and so we may have been socialized to think differently. So that is why this level of self-awareness and self-assessment is needed. You need to develop psychological resilience and coping to prevent burnout at a personal level, and that is something that all social workers need to do. And this can be very well done by developing a system of support system of colleagues who will give you unconditional acceptance of yourself, and who will support you, and it can be used as sounding boards. So each one of us as a social worker needs this kind of support system to prevent and avoid burnout. The fourth competency is that you need to apply critical thinking to inform and communicate professional judgments. You need to, how will you apply this critical thinking? You need to first examine the key changes brought about by globalization on family relationships and lifestyles in India and its impact on the individual family unit. Then you need to recognize that socio-economic, political and cultural inequities, environmental issues and regional disparities faced by families based on their class, caste, religion and social economic status. So once you have recognized and examined these key changes, then you will have a multi-focused knowledge of human functioning and behavior, And you will also have knowledge about the socio-economic and legal factors that have resulted in whatever stigmatization, discrimination, marginalization or social isolation that the family, many of the family units whom you work with will have faced. Once having done that, then you will imagine the change, then you will need to also examine the changes that have been brought about by globalization, which I talked in my first subsection on family relations and lifestyles, and how it impacts the individual family unit. So you need to recognize that these are changes that we need to recognize, examine and acknowledge. Then you need to apply your critical thinking about the structure in which the services are delivered. Whether your NGO or the practice that you are offering expects the family to fit into what you are offering, or that you tailor make the services to each family's individual needs. So you need to look at that as well. Then you need to cooperate with and partner with other professionals and organizations to provide services to mutual clients. You also need to be aware of other resources that may benefit your clients and make appropriate referrals for them. And you need to lastly develop the capacity for self-reflection, creativity, critical inquiry and evidence-based family-centered practice. Now, you need to engage with diversity and difference in practice. Now, I have talked quite a bit about how families are unique. Every family is unique, and structures, they may have varying structures, they may have varying socio-economic differences. So, when I talk about diversity, having a diversity practice, I'm talking about first thing, understanding difference, and also understanding the dynamics related to privilege, power, intergroup relationships, and oppression and their effects on the well-being of families. So I'm talking about both these things when I'm talking about the diversity perspective. And you also need to develop an attitude towards professional social work that is inclusive, that genuinely values differences and variation and taps on the natural curiosity about differences. So you need to be able to be inclusive in your practice. And to become really diversity competent, you will need to critically examine your own knowledge for distortions or prejudices or stereotypes, and eliminate the influence of personal bias and values in your practice. Because as I said earlier, we are all products of our own socialization, and because of that socialization, we may come into our practice with a lot of preconceived stereotypes and prejudices or distortions. So we need to critically examine that. You need to be able to demonstrate your ability to competently address gender-based dilemmas in your practice with families, related to respecting the family's cultural values, even if when they conflict with your own personal and professional systems. So if you come across, you are in, you have a family where they do not respect all the family members equally, and this conflicts with your value system, you need to be able to still address this and respect the family's cultural values. Now, the sixth competency is about advocating for social justice and social and economic justice. See, social work is a human rights profession, and so it is our responsibility to protect and promote the human rights of individuals. It is also as a family social worker, it is also our responsibility to protect the rights of families. not only you need to protect the rights of families, you need to promote and protect the rights of all individuals in the family, irrespective of age and gender, and each individual's duty to recognize and respect the right of other family members. Then you also need to demonstrate that you are able to protect and promote the family unit's right with reference to the environment without discrimination of race or color or language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social status. So this has to do with the family's access to resources from the environment. So your practice actually needs to include a continuum of coordinated services for vulnerable families or families at risk who have experienced family violence, which will reduce their risk for child or domestic abuse and improve individual and family functioning. The seventh competency is that you need to apply knowledge of human behavior and social environment. For this, you will first need to comprehend the current realities of families in the historical, socio-political, economic and environmental context. I have talked quite a bit about these contexts, context of the families, and so you need to be able to comprehend the wide variety of family structures, the norms governing interaction and behavior of their members, the control and distribution of resources within each of these family forms, the roles, obligations and relationships of the members with each other, the issues confronting them, as well as the unique strengths and their capacity for resilience and adaptation. And you also need to apply your understanding of the legislative, programmatic, political, economic and theoretical formulations which are fundamental to delivery service. You will need to demonstrate that you can effectively critique and apply this knowledge to understand the person and the environment. At the same time, you need to be able to recognize that some of the problems faced by certain family units are complicated by the discrimination made out to them as a consequence of their family structure or socioeconomic or ethnic or religious or minority status, rather than inherent problems within the family unit. So what I'm trying to say is that the family unit sure has certain problems, but these problems get complicated by the environmental factors, by the discrimination meted out for them because of their other characteristics that the family has. Consequently, you will have to have the capacity, you will need to have the capacity for family advocacy and to advocate on behalf of the family as well as to help family members to advocate on their own behalf. Because very often families are need something but they do not have the strength or the resources to advocate for themselves. As in any field of practice in social work, you will need to integrate theory and practice. Now, what do we mean by that? That you need to be able to first examine family relationships within the family unit and within its environment from the perspective of all its members, integrate and synthesize research on families and family relations from a variety of disciplinary perspectives, as well as from available policy and legal frameworks. You see, when one family member says something for a given situation in the family, other family members may have a different perspective for that particular given situation. And each of these perspectives are important in a comprehensive understanding of that situation that the family is facing. So when you only talk to one person or listen to the perspective of only one person, you get only one perspective. But when you talk to all the family members, then you get a very different perspective of what really is the situation and how the family as a unit is perceiving it. So then you will need to be able to apply the basic tenets of the theories that you use, that is the ecological, the family systems framework, the family centered service delivery framework, including the strengths approach, the empowerment ideology, and the feminist perspective in your social work practice in family studies. So those are the theoretical bases, theoretical formulations on which you base your practice. So you need to be able to apply these into your practice. The last competency, but the most important competency is that you need to build a collaborative partnership relationship with the family unit in which each person's role and contribution is respected and power and control is shared. Before this, when the social worker was the expert, the social worker had all the power and control. And the difference here is that in a partnership approach, the power and control is shared with the family. There, even in terms of assessment, goal setting, intervention planning and implementation, it is done in accordance to the individual family's wishes, not according to what the expert or the professional thinks the way it should be done. So it is done on the basis of the family's choice or the family's wishes, and your intervention needs to be tailor-made or individualized to each family's needs and resources. Then you need to also acknowledge and show that you acknowledge the formal and informal support networks for each family and involve them in the assessment, planning, intervention and evaluation as per the family's wishes. Sometimes the families may not wish that certain informal support systems are involved in the planning or even the intervention process. So you need to go by the family's wishes. You need to be able to put down all this information to the family, but it is the family which will finally choose what it wants and how it wants to deal with its problem. So also at the same time, we need to help the family to build its formal and informal structures. Some of the informal natural occurring structures and their connections with the formal helping system. Very often there are enough formal helping support systems in their environment, but they've never accessed them. Because they've not known how to access them, they've never known how to reach out and make use of the resources that are available in the community. So it's important that you demonstrate the ability to assist families in their efforts to access the necessary resources that they may require. You also need to undertake various kinds of assessments, and some of the assessments that you need to be knowledgeable about are strengths-based psychosocial assessments, risk assessments such as family, violence and abuse, capacity functioning and developmental assessment, including support and participation requirements. You also need to show capacity to develop an action plan by using each family's current coping strategies as a starting point and work with the family to strengthen their repertoire of coping strategies. You also need to explore with the family the possibility of family members, say, participating in self-help groups. Provide information about available resources to maximize choice and opportunities for the family unit and its members. At the same time, you need to be able to collaborate with multidisciplinary teams by providing referrals to your clients for accessing other services, and support and coordinate your family unit's access to the other resources. Basically, your intervention, what I'm really trying to say is that your intervention needs to be individualized, it needs to be flexible, it needs to be responsive to the family's identified needs, and it needs to be focused on strengthening and supporting family functioning. You need to be able to help families identify their own strengths and assets, and that they have, rather than correcting their weaknesses. As such a strategy will actually empower them. You need to build on the family's capacity to navigate the complex health and welfare systems, access information for them, and efficiently use their services. You know, for example, our hospitals, especially our state or government hospitals, are a maze, a very complicated maze, and one is dazed when one enters a complex like that, because you just don't know where to go and there is nobody to really guide you. And so helping and assisting families to access some of these resources is also very important. Lastly, you need to structure your service delivery in such a way that the family feels as normal as possible and their family life is disrupted as little as possible. For example, you may, you may try to meet the family at a time when all its family members are present, and at a time where it doesn't where the family doesn't have to give up one of its chores to come and meet you. So you need to work around the family's routine so that they feel normal, they are not giving up anything for coming to meet you, and they need to feel like any other family, even though they may be vulnerable and having difficulties at a given point in time. You need to be able to support families, the family units, to become self-advocates or advocate on their behalf. And you need to help them and yourself advocate for new services for families, or helping or strengthening the existing ones. And of course, you need to engage in research and publish in peer-reviewed journals, because there is a lot of, there's a dearth of written material, indigenous written material on Indian families. And in fact, in the last 2-3 decades, there is very little written on families per se, family research, because families have somehow been subsumed by other systems, such as by other sectors of the population. So you may have families may be seen in research on children, on adults, on senior citizens, on women, but they are assumed by research on these sectors of the population. And so family research on families itself have taken a setback, and we need to revive and understand what is happening to families by doing family research on family units themselves. So that's what I have to say. This is a very challenging field. It's a growing and evolving field of social work practice, and I urge you to read a little more to dwell on the competencies that I have talked about. I have given you some further readings on it as well, and it would be a good idea for you to visit one or two family welfare agencies to see the work that family counseling centers are doing with families. So that's it. Thank you. Goodbye.